We're going to do a sample of a flat felled seam. A flat felled seam is a seam that's used in predominantly men's clothes, men's shirts. It is also a seam that you will find on the inside of jeans. This is a seam that is very strong, it's very durable. And so it's a very common type of seam to do. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sew 5/8 of an inch. Let me get my thread here. We're going to sew a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, always back stitch. Whenever you sew, you want to always back stitch. So you're going to sew 5/8 of an inch along the length. Now do notice that my fabrics are separate. In other words, I'm not sewing on the fold of a fabric. These are two separate fabric pieces, and I have lined them up. So even though you have folded yours, you will probably cut away that fold. After you have sewn your 5/8 of an inch, and the reason you do it like this is, again, remember, the pattern has had 5/8 of an inch worked into it. So in order for something to fit correctly, you are going to follow the pattern exactly as it asks. Then you are going to trim one of these seams down 1/4 of an inch. So you can draw that if you need to, if you don't know what 1/4 of an inch is going to look like, or you can just eyeball it. So if you are good at eyeballing, you're going to cut 1/4 of an inch away. So I can see what 1/4 of an inch looks like. So on only one seam, not both, you are going to cut it down by down to 1/4 of an inch. In other words, the distance from the line that you have sewn out to the cut edge is 1/4 of an inch. So you're going to simply cut along, and you're going to cut away this excess so that you have 1/4 of an inch left. Then the flat felled seam requires that you then turn your fabric. I'm going to finger press. Always good to finger press. It helps. You really want this all to lay nice and flat. And what happens with the flat felled seam is it is now going to enclose what you just did. So I'm going to take the seam that is not cut, and I am going to, again, remember our lovely finger pressing, I'm going to again finger press so that it comes up to the sewn stitch. Don't go beyond, that'll be a problem. Come up to, you can be a little short of that stitch, but you want to come up to that sewn stitch. Now you might find that you need to pin this down, and in order for it to stay in place, you have, now remember, you have finger pressed, and I did a very good job over here, so let me finger press some more. But you're going to turn it over, and the fabric that you have turned over is going to tuck underneath. So you're going to get the raw edges, they're all going to tuck underneath, and now you are going to sew along this folded edge. So this time you are not following a seam allowance because your fabric covers the sewing machine entirely. You are now going to sew by looking at where your needle is lined up. So I'm going to line up my needle with this edge and I'm going to sew on the folded edge. Again, remember, always start with a back stitch. And slowly, don't ever sew over a pin, but slowly sew along that edge. With my camera, I have to have my machine further away than I normally would, so I'm not necessarily lined up as closely myself as I would like to be. But you have sewn along the edge of this fold, and you're going to maintain a nice even distance. And on the front side of the fabric, you're going to have this line, this extra visible line. Now, if it's a garment, this thread is going to match your fabric. I'm using a contrasting thread so that you can see. But here is a flat felled seam, and here it is on the other side.